Trump administration is handing down another congestion pricing ultimatum and funding threat.
He is not playing around anymore. In a letter, he threatened to pull funding for road construction projects, not just here in the city.
So President Trump is making good on his promise to take back these streets and eliminate New York's hated driving taxes once and for all. But New York has refused to turn off their money-generating cameras, which toll every car on the road in what many say is a socialist redistribution scheme to take away the freedom of drivers while forcing them into our crime-ridden subway. Something the president says overwhelmingly hurts New York's middle class to unfairly benefit the rich.
It's outrageous. If you're rich or your company pays for you to come into the city, it's great, traffic's down. But if you're the average New Yorker or someone from New Jersey and you're coming in, you can't afford it.
Supposing you worked in a shoe shop or you worked in a restaurant as a waiter and you have to come into Manhattan and they're taking, many dollars out of your pocket, can't afford to do it.
Governor Hochul rode the 7 train with MTA Chair Janno Lieber. As he pointed out, new lighting, more cops, and other safety upgrades. It was an in-your-face attempt to send a message to arch-enemy Sean Duffy, the Federal Transportation Secretary, and his never-ending criticisms of subway service as he tries to kill congestion pricing.
And so if you want people to ride public transportation, then make public transportation beautiful. Make it safe. Felony crime on the subway is up 9% this year alone.
Does the president actually have the power to pull congestion pricing, or does he need to actually convince the governor to do this?
Well, that's a really good question, Christine, because here's the deal. He actually does have the power.
So New York City is now suing to stop President Trump from taking away their loot machines, which have been up and running for several months. But what nobody's talking about is that although these driving taxes have been rolled out and put into effect, none of the promises they were supposed to deliver have been kept. First, people were told that in exchange for paying to exercise one's freedom of mobility in a car, the MTA would get all those taxes and make some big changes, which would involve turning the subway into a shining public transit system the world would be jealous of. But anybody who's visited the subway recently will tell you that those promises, they haven't happened at all. In fact, things down there are getting worse. And it's not just the infrastructure which continues to rot away and collapse on a daily basis. In spite of the fact that New York City has been taxing cars to fix this place for the last 5 months, no, it's also becoming less safe. And today, assaults are 50% higher than they were just 5 years ago. And that brings us to the real reason the president has to step in and shut off these cameras. They were turned on in exchange for promises that were either fake to begin with or that our leaders have no intention or ability to keep. But they are keeping the money these things make every single day, which the Trump administration now wants permanently disabled, threatening not just New York City, but the entire state with a funding freeze on infrastructure projects if the city doesn't stop stealing from the poor to improve the neighborhoods of rich people by reducing traffic and pollution in Manhattan at the expense of every other borough in New York and every city and town across America. Because as you're about to see, these driving cameras, they don't just pose a threat to New York City. Oh no, they pose a massive threat to our entire country. So here we are in the New York subway, or as I like to call it, the land of broken promises, all of which we were told would be kept as long as every car on the road had to pay some sort of fee just to drive down it. But look at this place, it's falling apart. We got signs talking about how it's improving, but even those signs are falling apart, which is a sign that if the president doesn't step in and shut this thing down, other cities and towns across the country could try a similar scheme, making promises in order to implement new taxes, which they don't intend to keep either.
Let's talk a little bit about congestion pricing. Yeah. You have been going head to head with Governor Hochul about getting rid of it. She's saying the feds have nothing to do with this.
The federal highways does have a role because these are federal roads in New York City. So we do have a role. By the way, this is the first time in American history that there's no free pathway to get into a certain area. There's no free path.
So this driving tax, it's $9 per vehicle, and it applies to every car that enters Manhattan. It was passed on a lie, and if this thing is allowed to stand, this will certainly not be the last time in American history it happens. And that's because the playbook is so simple. New York City has one of the worst public transit systems in the entire world. It's gross, it's unsafe, it's falling apart, and people down here are worried that something bad could happen to them. That's why folks try to avoid this place. Not to mention, even though this place gets $20 billion a year to operate, there are still folks living on trains and in platforms who don't seem to benefit at all from the endless resources that get dumped into this place. But here's the thing, everybody in New York was promised that the moment congestion pricing kicked in, everything down here was going to change and we were going to have a sleek, modern, wonderful subway system, which has not happened. In fact, everything that happens down here is a lie. Like these old signals, which they always say they're modernizing. Signal modernization's been a claim they've made for almost 15 years at this point. Yet instead of that, what we get are signs like this that tell us how bad the trains are screwed up and how there are endless service suspensions, revealing one thing, that the lies New Yorkers are continually being fed about the subway and how it's going to change aren't changing anytime soon.
It's outrageous. It's a policy. If you're rich or your company pays for you to come into the city, it's great. Traffic's down, right? They're raising money for MTA, but if you're the average New Yorker or someone from New Jersey and you're coming in, you can't afford it. We don't have roads just for the elites. They're for everyone.
Okay, stop it right there. We were promised that none of this would exist once the city got its congestion pricing. Guess what? Not only does it exist, the people running the subway are saying the money they get isn't enough. They started wanting more the second this thing got rammed through. And the fact that they're now threatening the general public with service disruptions if they don't get more is just laughable. In fact, it sure makes the subway look like fixing it is a never-ending scam that will always line the pockets of the elites and well-connected in this city. And although this scheme has been allowed to go on for decades, now that drivers and cars are going to be taxed so that it continue, the president has to step in and do something. Because if he doesn't, scams like this will soon perpetuate across the country, while the general public wait around scratching their heads wondering why their lives aren't getting any better.
This is a fundraiser for MTA.
In part. Part of it is to get rid of congestion.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's not. She's talking.
I mean, I'm not going to disrespect you here, so don't get me wrong. But part of it is to get rid of congestion.
When you listen to the governor, she talks about how much she can raise. If it was about congestion, what they would have done is a study to say, how much do we have to charge to reduce congestion by how much? That's a simple study.
So he's right. If the plan to tax cars was actually about bringing down congestion, you could use a calculator and some estimates to figure out what you'd need to charge to get the desired amount of traffic on our overcrowded streets. For example, today we have a $9 toll, which was originally $15 and then reduced because of backlash. However, no study was ever done that told us what the expected reductions in traffic actually were at various price points. Literally, the toll was made to be as high as possible without riots in the streets during an election year. At the same time, if this were actually about public transit, or if New York City were even capable of running a public transit operation, none of what we see down here would actually exist. This place would be a lot different. But sadly, that's not the case. And while the subway ends up doubling as a homeless shelter for neglected New Yorkers, felonies and assaults are also rising through the roof. All of which should be a huge red flag for anyone considering a car tax to fund this place. It's been obvious from the very beginning that every promise from a politician about this rotting hunk of junk would be broken. Or just flat out unkeepable, because a system underneath all of this exists which just takes every cent it gets and throws it right in the garbage. However, the federal government is ultimately in charge of the streets of New York, which means they've got the ability to step in and dictate what happens up there, even if the city says it needs the money for down here. If they don't, those in charge of other parts of America are going to figure out how this scam works, and pretty soon all of us will be afflicted by what you see right here.
Again, federal roads, right? Federal permitting, right? So the federal government has a role in saying what is legal and what is not. And the bottom line is you can't just use your roads for the elites. And that's what we have right now. And if you want people to ride a subway, make it clean, make it safe. It's very simple.
So here's the thing. The federal government, they're in charge of the roads. But if they let little cities and towns all over the place make up different rules for how they're going to operate, we're going to have big problems. And it is legitimately wrong to scam average people by promising that you're going to spend money on their behalf and never doing it. Now, of course, many of you watching are going to say that's what the government does already, but that's precisely the point. At some point, somebody's got to step in and say enough is enough. And that's what's happening. Because if it doesn't happen, it won't be long before somebody somewhere, even in a part of the country without a subway, figures out that, hey, if we tax cars, we could fund better bus service, right? And it's been speculated that if New York's congestion taxes don't go away, there will be retaliatory taxes in New Jersey for drivers over there. Letting this stand could be a recipe for all-out mayhem and disaster on the streets of our country everywhere, as embittered localities engage in a war of attrition, taxing each other's populations on a regular basis and pocketing everything. Now sure, token amounts of money do make their way into the subway to give us things like this flashing light seen through the window of a relatively new subway car, but even though the promise is for 80% of the taxation money to come down here and fix this place, it looks like 0% of it is having any effect. All while individuals living in the richest, nicest, most exclusive parts of New York benefit from quieter streets and less vehicular pollution, which, as you're about to see, is the other part of the reason why the federal government has to step in and end the games New York City has been playing. So here's another string of these cameras right up here, and as you're about to see, these things benefit wealthy parts of the city in more ways than just traffic congestion. They outsource all of the issues that were taking place here to other parts of the city, which just so happen to be less affluent, like Queens, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. But our leaders have a problem. They don't have enough money, and they never will. And every single year they get boatloads of it from the federal government, who also approves what they do on our streets to begin with. And before we get into how these things hurt neighborhoods where the rich don't live and will never visit, we've got to look at how the Trump administration wants to shut them down for good.
Tolling must end no later than May 21st, 2025. And Duffy today adding a new threat. If congestion pricing remains, no further advanced construction authorizations for projects within the borough of Manhattan.
So this is where push comes to shove. Federal government isn't gonna allow the city to do any more advanced construction projects here whatsoever if they keep these things up and operating. Because as you're about to see, not only has the implementation of these never been about congestion, which you see right here on the screen, the promises delivered by these cameras are a one-way street of benefits that just go to areas rich people live. Like the people who live in these high-rises in Manhattan, their lives are a little bit better off, as there is considerably less congestion going on here on 42nd Street than there ever was in the past, along with less road noise from massive trucks like this idling all over the place. But here's the problem. All of that pollution, all of that congestion, all of that road noise, it's got to go somewhere. And if it's no longer happening outside of these apartments, where is it happening? Well, as you're about to see, the answer to that question is one our leaders desperately do not want you to know about.
The face of chronic respiratory illness in the South Bronx.
A lot of people mention the Bronx and, oh, we don't know what a computer looks like, but we do know what bad air quality looks like.
It looks like this. 1 in 5 school children in the South Bronx have asthma. Stephanie Polanco watches her child struggle with respiratory issues.
She thinks it's normal to have asthma because that's how frequent it is.
So look at that. While people in Manhattan get to breathe cleaner air and have less asthma, people in the Bronx get to have more. What a great trade. Oh yeah, and if the people in the Bronx need to drive into Manhattan, they have to pay for it. So they're paying for all of this extra pollution. So is everybody in every outer borough. And while they're paying for it, New York City is not keeping its promise of creating the best public transit system the world has ever seen, that's for sure. Somebody left the president a thank you note on this barrel, which has a sign talking about construction projects. I wonder if this means something. The barrels also say power power on the sides of them, perhaps referring to the power the president has to cancel congestion pricing and future New York construction projects, which is pretty much the only hope people living in outer boroughs actually have. If this doesn't happen, pollution in working class areas is just going to get worse. Those neighborhoods are going to suffer. Property values could even decline because of all the increased traffic. But the worst part about this is it was never a secret that the pollution of the rich was just going to be sent to other parts of town. And part of the way congestion pricing got through was money was going to be sent to the Bronx for things like air quality monitors that were supposed to keep an eye on how sick all of the extra traffic is actually making people. That's like saying you're gonna open a dental clinic at a candy factory where people are just ingesting sugar constantly. That's not really a fix. Sure, you might fill people's cavities faster, but people are getting cavities. You see the problem?
To reduce congestion, please do it here. Environmental justice organization South Bronx Unite Thursday displaying its arsenal of air quality monitors with the state's plan to reduce.
You know, at least the city kept its promise to install the air quality monitors, but that's not necessarily a good thing. If we're monitoring the quality of the air in an entire borough, we know there's going to be a problem. Studies have already shown a giant cloud of smog is just headed over to that area. That's just terrible. But here's where this is headed as smog, pollution, and vehicular congestion go up in areas of town that don't have these cameras. Do you know what our leaders are going to propose? Well, it's simple. These cameras worked so well to eliminate those things down here in Manhattan. Let's just roll them out everywhere. We already know the people running the subway want more money, and we already know that people are complaining about pollution. Well, the fix is so simple. It's right over there. Just put these on every single road in the entire city and then the entire state, and then roll them out everywhere to save the planet and take people's money and give it to the government for dubious reasons. And let's say you work and you have to commute by car every day. Well, that's your fee for driving to your place of business. $2,300 is the fee you pay not to risk your life on the subway or to take a car if maybe the subway you live near doesn't have an escalator or an escalator that works. Does that sound fair to you? What do you think? Let me know. Are these taxation cameras coming to the rest of the country at some point? If they're not stopped here and now, is the president doing the right thing by taking back control of New York City's roads? Let me know. See you in the next video.